Story 1: Downright Disturbing Movie Theater Horror Stories. When I was approximately 9 years old, during the summer months, my grandfather would take me to the local movie theater every Thursday. We would catch the latest films, usually in the morning or early afternoon, which meant there weren't many other patrons. One time, we had the entire theater to ourselves. We chose 2 seats in one of the back rows, considering them the best seats in the house. I can't recall the movie we watched, as this was a long time ago. However, as we continued watching, something unusual happened. No one else showed up, which was unusual because typically a few latecomers would trickle in after the movie started. But this time, we genuinely had the whole theater to ourselves. Around the movie's halfway point, my grandpa needed to use the bathroom. To avoid interrupting my movie-watching experience, he allowed me to stay by myself while he was gone. About 30 seconds after he left, I noticed someone entering the theater out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see who it was since I didn't think my grandpa could return that quickly. It was a man in his early 30s, wearing a striped employee uniform. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he walked over to an emergency exit and propped it open, letting in a stream of daylight. Then, he returned to the main exit and left. At that time, I didn't think much of it and wasn't bothered at all. My attention returned to the movie. However, my focus shifted when the light from the door suddenly grew brighter. I glanced back at it, only to find the door now wide open. Another man had opened it from the outside. He shone a dim flashlight around the theater before it landed on me. He turned off the light and gestured for me to come to him using his finger. At that age, I obediently did what adults told me. I had never received the stranger danger talk, as back then, strangers weren't perceived as a significant threat as they are today. So, I got up from my seat and started walking toward the exit. The man introduced himself as John and seemed friendly, offering me candy he hadn't finished from a previous movie instead of throwing it away. My 9-year-old self was excited, and I accepted. John explained that the candy was in his car's trunk. He grabbed my hand firmly and led me to the only car in the secluded parking lot behind the theater. As we got closer to the car, he pulled out a set of keys from his pocket and used them to open the trunk. Inside were various candy bars, and he told me to choose any I wanted. Just as I started crawling into the trunk, the theater's exit door burst open, and my grandpa started yelling aggressively at John. This took me by surprise because I had never heard my grandpa raise his voice before. In response, I backed away from the trunk, and John quickly got into the driver's seat and sped away, leaving the trunk open. I started crying, not fully comprehending the danger I had narrowly avoided. My grandpa, now in a comforting voice, tried to calm me down. Later, I learned that the reason he knew where I had gone was because John had left the exit door slightly ajar after luring me outside. My grandpa called the police shortly after the incident, but the car I almost entered had no license plates, and it was a very common model, making it untraceable. He provided a description of John, but he was never found. As for the man who initially propped open the door, he wasn't an employee at all and was also never identified. Thankfully, this was a one-off occurrence, and no other children in the building were targeted that day or at any other time. As far as we know, I believe they might have installed an alarm system for the emergency exits after that incident, but I can't confirm as we never returned to that movie theater. Story 2: Downright Disturbing Movie Theater Horror Stories. Fast forward to when I was 16, and I got my first job at a local movie theater in my town. The place desperately needed employees for closing shifts, which worked out for me. The theater wasn't large, making it manageable to work alone on some days, but typically I worked with 1 or 2 other people. On one Tuesday night, my coworker Noah, around my age, and I were working the closing shift. We were responsible for getting everything ready for the morning openers. As the night progressed, we finished checking all the theaters to ensure no one had fallen asleep, which happened more frequently than you might think. To control the theater lights manually, we had to go to the opposite side of the building, so I usually did the checks in the dark using my phone's flashlight. I had completed my checks in all the theaters except one, so I went in with my phone's flashlight ready. I started from the front row and made my way back, but before I began searching, I stopped. I heard breathing, and at first, I thought it was coming from the vents, but as I listened more closely, I realized it was human breathing. I turned off my flashlight and aimed it toward the row of seats but couldn't see anyone. I felt my heart racing. Someone was hiding deliberately, and I wanted to call out, but fear kept me silent. I stood there, frozen, for a while, just listening. Finally, I decided to retreat as if I hadn't heard anything. I returned to the lobby, climbed the stairs, and left the theater. Outside, I found Noah and told him about what I had heard. He also seemed hesitant to go back inside, but we mustered the courage to do so. This time, we turned on the lights manually, one by one, and checked the theaters. We found nothing out of the ordinary and thought the person might have exited through an emergency door, which sometimes happened. While checking the exits, we noticed no signs that any of them had been used, as there was untouched snow on the ground. Noah began to question my story, and I even began to doubt it. He convinced me that I might have heard things or that the speakers were malfunctioning. I accepted his explanation, and we closed up for the night, and both went home. The next evening, I was scheduled for another closing shift with Noah. We had to vacuum the hallways before leaving, something I typically did earlier, but this night it got delayed. As I was about to grab a spare vacuum from a storage closet, I remembered that I hadn't been in most of these closets. I wasn't told much about them during my training, only that there was a spare vacuum in one. I approached a closet, but it was surprisingly already unlocked. I opened the door and reached for a light switch, but an unbearable stench hit me. I took a step back to breathe fresh air. From the back of the closet, I heard rustling sounds. I closed and locked the door and rushed around the building searching for Noah. When I found him, I told him about the closet. His expression changed immediately. We both wondered if it was related to the previous night's incident. At his suggestion, we decided to call the police. We waited outside while they arrived, then informed them about the strange occurrences from both nights. They took the keys to the closet and went inside. To our shock, they emerged with a deranged-looking woman. When they opened the closet, she had attacked them with a knife but was subdued. In the process, they found two decaying bodies, a man and a woman, crammed in a corner of the closet. That's all we knew about the situation at that point. Our manager arrived, and we were told we could leave, which I did immediately. I quit the job the following day, and my manager understood. I've never spoken to Noah again since that night. This incident occurred while I was in high school, and my friends and I loved going to our local mall's movie theater. We usually went in large groups, but this time, it was just my friend Avery and me. We chose a late showing of a movie, but despite the late hour, the theater stayed open, catering to our preferences. When we arrived, we found the theater completely empty, which was common for us. We selected 2 seats in one of the front rows and settled in for the movie. Before entering the theater, I made the unfortunate decision to buy a large soda. As the movie progressed, I realized I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I informed Avery and headed to the restroom. The bathroom had manual light switches, and they were off when I walked in. To my surprise, I found a man standing near the sinks. I couldn't determine his age precisely, but he was just standing there, making eye contact with me for a brief moment. I proceeded to use the restroom and wash my hands. To my unease, the man was still in the same spot when I left. He followed me back into the theater and sat 1 seat away from us, although the entire theater was empty. Throughout the movie, the man kept glancing over at us every few minutes, not making any effort to hide it. When the movie ended, Avery and I hurriedly left the theater, and unsurprisingly, the man followed us. As we walked through the empty hallways, there were no employees in sight. We made our way to the exit and, after a quick check, the man followed us, sticking close behind. When we reached our car in the parking lot, I pulled out of the space and saw the man get into a blue Dodge Charger. We sped away, but our relief was short-lived as another car with bright headlights pulled up behind us at a red light. We couldn't determine if it was the same blue Charger, as the headlights were blinding. The driver's side door swung open, and the man charged toward our car, brandishing a knife and attacking one of the windows. I floored the gas pedal, ran the red light, and took a right onto the next street to lose the man. Fortunately, this tactic seemed to work, and we found a secluded spot to catch our breath.